This warrant is missing an authorizing signature, Sergeant. The handcuffs click tighter. No response. Just the cold pressure of metal against skin and the echo of footsteps on marble floors. 9:47 a.m. The lobby of the county courthouse hums with the ordinary sounds of a Tuesday morning. Clerks shuffling papers. Attorneys checking their phones. A security guard yawning near the metal detector. And in the center of it all, a black woman in a white button-down shirt is being forced to her knees. Her name, according to the arrest warrant, now crumpled in the sergeant's fist, is Aurora Wilson. 33 years old. No prior record. No history of violence. She came to this courthouse 45 minutes ago with a single request: a copy of an old case file. Now, blood runs down her temple where her head struck the edge of a wooden bench. The sergeant, a broad-shouldered man whose nameplate reads Mercer, yanks her arms back with more force than necessary. His partner, a younger officer with nervous eyes, holds up a laminated card and begins reading. Aurora Wilson, you are under arrest for theft of evidence from court records. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say? I haven't been in the records room. Her voice is calm, too calm for someone bleeding on courthouse marble. Check the security cameras. Mercer leans down, his breath hot against her ear. Cameras don't lie, sweetheart. Neither do fingerprints. Around them, the morning crowd has frozen mid-step. A mother pulls her child closer. A man in a gray suit looks away, suddenly fascinated by his shoelaces. An elderly woman reaches for her phone, then thinks better of it and slides it back into her purse. No one speaks. No one intervenes. A female officer, young, blonde, smirking, steps closer and looks down at Aurora with undisguised contempt. Stealing evidence right here in the courthouse. Some people have no shame. Aurora says nothing. Her eyes track the officer's movements, cataloging badge numbers, noting positions. When she speaks again, it's directed at Mercer, and her voice carries no anger, only precision. Warrant number 2024 CF00847, issued this morning. The signature line for the authorizing magistrate is blank. She tilts her head slightly, blood dripping onto her collar. That's a violation of Rule 4, Florida Rules of Criminal Procedure. This arrest is legally void. For half a second, something flickers across Mercer's face. Uncertainty. Then it hardens into contempt. Save the legal lecture for your public defender. He hauls her to her feet. The movement is rough, deliberately so. Her shoulder twists at an awkward angle, and she inhales sharply, but doesn't cry out. The crowd parts as they march her toward the elevator. Phones stay in pockets. Eyes stay on the floor. The security guard by the metal detector watches with his arms crossed, making no move to ask questions or check credentials. At the end of the corridor, heavy oak doors swing open. A figure emerges in black robes, silver hair combed back with precision. The nameplate on the doors behind him reads, Honorable Harrison Vale, Circuit Court Judge. Aurora's eyes lock onto him. Her bleeding stops seeming important. Her twisted shoulder stops mattering. She knows that walk. She knows those cold gray eyes. 8 years. 8 years since she last saw him. 8 years since he destroyed everything she was building. 8 years since she vanished into a new name, a new city, a new life. Now, in this moment, standing in handcuffs in the courthouse where her career died before it began, Aurora Mason, not Wilson, never really Wilson, watches the man who ruined her life approach with the measured steps of someone who owns every inch of this building. Vale's eyes find hers. For exactly half a second, his stride breaks. His jaw tightens. His fingers flex at his sides. Then the mask returns. Smooth, judicial, untouchable. The elevator doors close, cutting off the view. But through the narrowing gap, Aurora sees it clearly. The flicker of recognition in his eyes. The shadow of fear beneath his composure. He remembers her. Good. Because she remembers everything. 45 minutes earlier, Aurora Wilson, the name she's carried for 8 years now, parked her rental car in the courthouse lot and checked her reflection in the rearview mirror. White shirt, black slacks, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back in a simple twist. Nothing memorable, nothing that would draw attention. She looked exactly like what she was supposed to be, a woman running a routine errand, requesting public records, following procedure. The manila folder on her passenger seat contained Form AO41, properly filled out. Case number 2016-CR2847. A civil matter from 8 years ago, technically closed but never truly finished. That case file held names, dates, transaction records that someone powerful had worked very hard to bury. Aurora had spent 8 years preparing for this moment, learning to disappear, learning to rebuild, learning to wait. Now she was done waiting. The courthouse security line moved slowly. Aurora placed her purse on the conveyor belt, stepped through the metal detector, collected her belongings on the other side. Normal, invisible, forgettable. The records clerk's window sat at the end of a long hallway, past courtrooms and conference rooms, and the low murmur of lawyers negotiating plea deals. Aurora walked with measured steps, neither hurrying nor dawdling. Her shoes made soft clicks against the marble floor. The woman behind the counter, Diana Holt, according to her nameplate, looked up with the glazed expression of someone who'd processed 10,000 requests and stopped caring around number 50. Help you? I need to request a copy of a case file. Aurora slid the form through the window. Case number 2016-CR2847. Diana took the paper, scanning it with practiced efficiency. Her eyebrows drew together slightly. This case is closed. Has been for years. I understand. Florida Statute Section 119.07 guarantees public access to court records. The form is complete. Something shifted in Diana's expression. The boredom faded, replaced by something sharper. She looked at Aurora more carefully now. The simple clothes, the calm demeanor, the precise knowledge of statutory requirements. Wait here. Diana disappeared through a door marked Staff Only. Through the small window, Aurora watched her pick up a phone, speak briefly, glance back through the glass with an expression that wasn't quite suspicion, but wasn't quite neutral either. Aurora noted the time, 9:32 a.m. She found a seat in the waiting area, a row of plastic chairs bolted to the floor. The woman next to her, white, middle-aged, expensive handbag, shifted almost imperceptibly away. Didn't look at Aurora, didn't acknowledge her, just moved her purse to her far side and angled her body toward the wall. Microaggression number 1. Aurora had stopped counting these years ago. They happened everywhere. Grocery stores, coffee shops, courthouses, the small, wordless ways people communicated that her presence made them uncomfortable. She pulled out a small notebook and pen, wrote 9:32, form submitted. 9:33, clerk made internal call. A shadow fell across her. Aurora looked up to find a bailiff standing over her, hand resting on his belt. Young, eager. the kind of eager that often meant trouble. "You waiting for something specific, ma'am? I submitted a records request. The clerk is processing it. Been sitting here a while." He glanced at the notebook in her hands. "What are you writing?" "Personal notes?" The bailiff, Sutter, his nameplate read, didn't move. His eyes traveled from her face to her hands to her purse, lingering in ways that felt less like security protocol and more like scrutiny. "This area is for people with courthouse business." "I have courthouse business. I'm waiting for my records request." He held her gaze for a long moment, testing, waiting for her to look away, to shrink, to apologize for existing in this space. Aurora didn't blink. Finally, Sutter stepped back. "Don't wander around," he said, as if she'd suggested otherwise. Then he walked away, but not far. She could feel his eyes on her back, watching. 9:41 a.m. Bailiff approached, attempted to establish dominance. Standard intimidation protocol. She wrote it down. Everything documented. Everything recorded. Diana Holt returned to the window. Her expression had changed again, not suspicious now, but almost nervous. She slid a clipboard through the opening. "Your request is being processed. It'll take some time. There's a verification procedure for older files." "How long?" "Hard to say. Could be an hour. Could be longer." Diana's fingers tapped against the counter. "You're welcome to wait, or you can leave a number and we'll call." Aurora studied the woman's face. Something was wrong. The request shouldn't take an hour. She'd processed dozens of similar requests in her previous life, and the standard turnaround was 15 to 20 minutes. Verification procedure was bureaucratic language for "we need time to figure out what to do with you." "I'll wait." She returned to her seat, opened her notebook, wrote 9:44, delay initiated, clerk appears uncomfortable, possible escalation incoming. 3 minutes later, the lobby doors opened, and Sergeant Mercer walked through. If this story is keeping you on edge, hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to see what happens next. The holding room smelled like industrial cleaner and old coffee. Aurora sat in a metal chair bolted to the floor, her hands now cuffed in front of her rather than behind. Small mercy. The wound on her temple had been covered with a single adhesive bandage. No medical evaluation, no questions about dizziness or blurred vision, just a strip of beige plastic and a curt, "You'll live." Sergeant Mercer had disappeared after depositing her here. The younger officer, the nervous one, stood by the door, studiously avoiding eye contact. Through the small window, Aurora could see Diana Holt conferring with someone in a suit. Their body language suggested urgency, concern. She tested her handcuffs. Tight, but not circulation cutting. She noted the position of the security camera in the corner. Red light steady, presumably recording. She catalogued the room's dimensions, the location of the door, the single overhead light fixture that buzzed with a faint electrical hum. 8 years of training had made these observations automatic. Assess the environment. Identify exits. Note potential threats. Never stop gathering information. The door opened. Diana Holt entered, carrying a manila folder that she clutched like a shield. She sat in the chair across from Aurora, crossing and uncrossing her ankles with nervous energy. "Ms. Wilson." Diana opened the folder, spreading papers across the metal table between them. "We have a serious problem. The problem is that I'm being illegally detained. The problem," Diana said, her voice hardening, "is that your fingerprints were found on the evidence box for case 2016-CR2847, the same case you requested this morning." She tapped a document, A forensic analysis report dated today. Explain that. Aurora looked at the report, looked at the date, looked at the timestamp, 7:45 a.m., 2 hours before she'd even arrived at the courthouse. That's impossible. The evidence doesn't lie. The evidence was manufactured. Aurora's voice remained steady. I arrived at this courthouse at approximately 9:20 a.m. I passed through security at 9:24. I submitted my records request at 9:32. At no point did I enter the records room. Your security cameras will confirm this. Diana's jaw tightened. The cameras in the records room were undergoing maintenance between 8 p.m. yesterday and 6 a.m. this morning. Convenient. Excuse me? I said it's convenient. Aurora leaned forward slightly. The one window of time that would show who actually accessed that evidence box happens to coincide with a camera maintenance period. And my fingerprints, allegedly found this morning, were matched against samples taken from hospital records 6 years ago. Not from me directly, from an old file. Something flickered in Diana's expression. Surprise, maybe, or recognition that this woman in handcuffs was asking questions that suggested expertise beyond the average citizen. How do you know where the comparison samples came from? Because proper fingerprint analysis requires fresh samples from the suspect for comparison. Using archived hospital records is irregular. Aurora paused. Unless someone wanted to ensure a match without actually having my prints to compare. Diana stood abruptly, gathering her papers. This is above my pay grade. She moved toward the door, then stopped, her hand on the handle. Without turning around, she said, "The preliminary hearing is in 45 minutes. Judge Vale will be presiding." The name landed like a physical blow. Aurora kept her face neutral, but inside, something cold and sharp awakened. Judge Harrison Vale? Yes. Diana finally turned, studying Aurora with new intensity. Do you know him? 8 years of memories. 8 years of buried rage. 8 years of preparation. I know of him, Aurora said. His reputation. Diana's eyes narrowed. Something in Aurora's tone had caught her attention. But she didn't push further. She just nodded once and left, the door clicking shut behind her. Aurora sat alone in the holding room, the fluorescent light buzzing overhead, and allowed herself exactly 10 seconds to feel the weight of what was happening. Harrison Vale. The man who'd threatened her into silence. The man who'd manufactured evidence to destroy her law school career. The man who'd forced her into witness protection because she'd seen things she shouldn't have seen. Now he was presiding over her case. Not coincidence. Not random assignment. This was orchestrated. He'd known she was coming. He'd prepared the trap. He'd made sure he would be the one to spring it. But he'd made one critical miscalculation. He thought she was still the frightened 25-year-old who'd run away 8 years ago. He thought she would crumble under pressure. He thought his power and position would crush her the way they'd crushed others before. He didn't know what she'd become in those 8 years. He didn't know the skills she'd acquired, the resources she'd built, the allies she'd cultivated. He didn't know that she'd come back specifically for him. Aurora closed her eyes and began to organize her thoughts. She had 45 minutes. 45 minutes to prepare for a confrontation 8 years in the making. 45 minutes to transform from victim to prosecutor. The handcuffs clinked softly as she adjusted her position. When she opened her eyes again, they held no fear. Only focus. Let him think he's winning. Let him believe he's in control. The truth would come out. It always did. The courtroom felt smaller than Aurora remembered. Or maybe it was the crowd that made it feel cramped. Reporters in the back row, attorneys clustered near the bar, bailiffs stationed at every exit. Word had spread quickly. A theft of evidence case, preliminary hearing requested same day, Judge Vale presiding. Unusual enough to draw attention. Aurora was escorted through a side door, her wrists still cuffed, the adhesive bandage on her temple beginning to peel at the edges. They'd given her a public defender, Marcus Webb, late 30s, exhausted eyes, a briefcase held together with duct tape and optimism. He'd had exactly 12 minutes to review her case before the hearing began. "Listen," Webb said in a rushed whisper as they approached the defense table. "The evidence against you is substantial. Fingerprints, witness statement from a clerk, missing materials. If you plead guilty now, we might negotiate down to 3 years instead of 7. "I'm not pleading guilty. Ms. Wilson, I want to see every piece of evidence they intend to present. That's my right under Rule 16. Webb blinked at her. Most defendants didn't cite discovery rules off the top of their heads. This is a preliminary hearing. Full discovery comes later. Then I want a continuance to allow time for proper investigation. Judge Vale doesn't grant continuances, especially not for cases like this." "Cases like what?" Webb hesitated, glanced at the bench where Vale would soon appear. "Cases he's personally interested in." Before Aurora could respond, the bailiff's voice cut through the murmur of the crowd. "All rise. The Honorable Harrison Vale presiding." The door behind the bench swung open. Vale emerged in his black robes, silver hair immaculate, posture perfect. He moved with the measured steps of a man who owned every inch of this room, every gavel, every witness stand, every soul within these walls. His eyes swept the courtroom with practiced authority, found the defense table, found Aurora, and for one fraction of a second, so brief that only someone watching for it would notice, his stride faltered. Aurora held his gaze, didn't look away, didn't shrink, just watched as recognition bloomed behind those cold gray eyes, followed quickly by calculation. Vale seated himself, adjusting his robes with deliberate calm. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of decades on the bench. "This court is now in session. Case number 2024 CF00847, State of Florida versus Aurora Wilson." He looked down at the papers before him. The defendant is charged with theft of evidence under Florida Statute Section 918.13. Ms. Wilson, do you understand the charges against you? "I understand them, Your Honor." "And how do you plead?" Aurora rose from her seat. Webb reached for her arm. Too late, too slow. She stood facing the bench, hands clasped in front of her despite the cuffs, spine straight, voice clear. "Not guilty, Your Honor." Vale's pen scratched against paper. Noted. The prosecution may present preliminary evidence. The prosecutor, a thin man named Reynolds, ambitious and hungry for conviction, rose with obvious satisfaction. "Your Honor, the state presents forensic evidence placing the defendant's fingerprints on the sealed evidence box for Case 2016 CR2847. Additionally, a voice recording recovered from the records room captures a female voice requesting access to sealed materials. The state is prepared to demonstrate that—" "I'd like to see the fingerprint analysis report," Aurora interrupted. Reynolds turned to stare at her. Webb grabbed her arm, whispering urgently, "You can't just—" "The defendant has a right to examine evidence presented against her." Aurora kept her eyes on Vale. Even in a preliminary hearing, Vale's expression remained neutral, but something tightened around his jaw. The defendant is not represented by counsel adequately familiar with her case. Such interruptions are— I'm exercising my right to examine evidence under the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. Additionally, Your Honor, I have concerns about the chain of custody for the forensic samples used in comparison. Aurora paused. The report indicates comparison prints were pulled from hospital records dated 2018. Standard protocol requires fresh samples from the defendant. Using archived medical records suggests either procedural error or deliberate manipulation. The courtroom had gone very quiet. Webb was staring at her like she'd grown a second head. Reynolds had stopped mid-gesture, his mouth slightly open. Even the reporters in the back row had stopped typing. Vale set down his pen. His eyes bore into hers with an intensity that might have unnerved her 8 years ago. "Ms. Wilson," he said softly, "you seem remarkably familiar with forensic procedures." "I read extensively, Your Honor." "Indeed." He leaned back in his chair. "Counselor Webb, do you have anything to add?" Webb stammered something about needing more time to review, about requesting a continuance, about irregularities in the arrest procedure. Vale listened with the patient expression of a cat watching a mouse run circles. "Motion for continuance denied. This court sees no procedural irregularities warranting delay." Vale turned back to Aurora. "The defendant may examine the fingerprint report." A bailiff brought the document to the defense table. Aurora read quickly, her eyes scanning for the details that mattered. Date of analysis, source of comparison samples, chain of custody signatures. "Your Honor, this report was generated at 7:45 a.m. today. I arrived at this courthouse at 9:20 a.m., verified by security checkpoint logs. My fingerprints could not have been placed on an evidence box prior to my arrival, yet this analysis was completed 95 minutes before I entered the building." "The prints were previously on the box," Reynolds countered, "from a prior unauthorized access." "Then why was I arrested today? If my prints were discovered during a routine audit, standard procedure would involve investigation before arrest. Instead, I was detained within minutes of requesting this specific case file." Aurora set down the report. "That suggests prior knowledge of my arrival and intent, which is impossible unless someone was monitoring my movements or intercepting my communications." Vale's fingers drummed against the bench. Once, twice, then stopped. "Ms. Wilson, are you suggesting a conspiracy against you?" "I'm suggesting that the evidence doesn't add up, Your Honor, and I'm requesting the opportunity to prove it." The courtroom hummed with whispered speculation. Vale raised his gavel, and silence fell instantly. "This court will take a 30-minute recess. The defendant will be returned to holding. Prosecution will prepare to address the chain of custody concerns raised." He stood, robes swirling. "Court is adjourned." As the bailiffs moved toward Aurora, Vale paused at the door to his chambers. He looked back over his shoulder, and for one moment, the judicial mask slipped. His eyes met hers, cold, calculating, and beneath it all, the unmistakable flicker of fear. He remembered her. He knew exactly who she was, and he was beginning to realize that she hadn't come back to run. The tension is building, and this story is just getting started. Drop a like if you want to see justice served. The holding room felt different now, charged. Aurora sat in the same metal chair, but something had shifted. The nervous young officer who'd guarded the door earlier had been replaced by Bailiff Troy Sutter, the same man who'd challenged her in the waiting area that morning. He stood with his back against the closed door, arms crossed, expression somewhere between hostility and amusement. That was quite a show in there. His voice was casual, conversational, dangerous. Making speeches about fingerprints and procedures. Judge Vale didn't look happy. Aurora said nothing. She was counting the ceiling tiles, a technique she'd learned years ago for maintaining calm under pressure. "Thing is," Sutter continued, pushing off from the door and moving closer, "people who make Judge Vale unhappy tend to have problems. Paperwork gets lost. Evidence gets complicated. Sometimes accidents happen." "Is that a threat, bailiff?" "It's friendly advice." He stopped directly in front of her chair, close enough that she could smell his aftershave. "You're making a lot of noise about nothing. The smart play is to take whatever deal they offer and disappear. Go back to wherever you came from. Forget about old case files." "And if I don't?" Sutter smiled. It wasn't pleasant. "Then things get difficult. For you. For anyone connected to you." He leaned down, hands on his knees, bringing his face level with hers. "Judge Vale has a lot of friends. Powerful friends. You don't want them as enemies." Aurora held his gaze without flinching. Her heart rate stayed steady. Her breathing remained even. 8 years of training had burned away the panic response that would have paralyzed her younger self. "I appreciate the advice," she said quietly, "but I don't take orders from bailiffs or judges, or anyone who thinks intimidation is a substitute for due process." Something ugly flickered in Sutter's eyes. His hand shot forward, not a punch, more of a shove aimed at her shoulder, designed to knock her off balance, to remind her of her helplessness in cuffs. Aurora moved. Later, she wouldn't be able to explain exactly how. The motion was instinctive, drilled into muscle memory through countless hours of training. She shifted her weight left, letting his hand slice past her shoulder into empty air. His momentum carried him forward, off balance. She rose from the chair in the same movement, pivoting her body to create distance. No strikes, no kicks, just geometry, angles and timing that put her between Sutter and the door in the space of a heartbeat. He caught himself against the wall, spinning to face her with genuine surprise on his face. The surprise curdled quickly into anger. "What the—" The door opened. Mercer filled the frame, his eyes moving from Sutter's flushed face to Aurora's defensive posture. "Problem here?" Sutter straightened his uniform, smoothing the fabric with deliberate casualness. "She almost fell. I was helping." Mercer's gaze lingered on Aurora. She could see him calculating. The distance between her and Sutter, the position of the overturned chair, the tension in the air. He was corrupt, but he wasn't stupid. "Hearing resumes in 10 minutes, he said finally. "Get her ready." Sutter nodded, not meeting Aurora's eyes. As Mercer turned away, Aurora caught his parting glance, a look that said he knew exactly what had happened in this room, and he didn't care. The door closed. Sutter grabbed her arm, rougher than necessary, and steered her toward the exit. "This isn't over," he muttered under his breath. Aurora didn't respond. She was already thinking 3 moves ahead. The courthouse corridor stretched before them, lined with portraits of past judges and framed documents too faded to read. Aurora walked between Sutter and another bailiff, her cuffed hands folded at her waist, her eyes straight ahead. But her mind was elsewhere. 8 years ago, in this very building. She'd been 25 then. Bright, ambitious, naive in the way that people are before they learn how deep corruption can run. A law student in her final year, completing a prestigious internship in the chambers of Judge Harrison Vale. He'd seemed impressive at first. Distinguished. The kind of judge who quoted precedent from memory and made junior attorneys tremble with a single raised eyebrow. Aurora had worked long hours, drafting motions, researching case law, eager to prove herself. Then came the night she'd stayed late to finish a brief. The night she'd walked past Vale's office and seen his computer screen still glowing, the door slightly ajar. She should have kept walking, should have minded her own business, should have been the kind of person who didn't notice things. But Aurora Mason had never been that kind of person. The email on his screen had been from an address she didn't recognize, hfinancial.trust, Cayman. The subject line read, "Confirmation of transfer, $200,000, deposited into an account labeled Vale Family Trust, Grand Cayman Branch." The accompanying message was brief. "Package received. Case will be handled per agreement. Helion thanks you for your cooperation." Aurora had recognized the name. Helion Financial Corporation, a company facing massive civil liability for defrauding pension funds. A case that had been assigned to Judge Vale's docket. She'd taken screenshots, 3 of them. Then she'd backed away from the door, her hands shaking, her mind racing through implications she didn't want to face. The next morning, she'd done what any idealistic law student would do. She'd reported it, filed a complaint with the Judicial Ethics Board, provided her evidence, waited for the system to work. The system had worked, just not the way she'd expected. Within a week, anonymous accusations of academic fraud had surfaced against her. Fabricated evidence of plagiarism in her law school thesis, a planted document with her signature that she'd never seen before. Vale had called her into his chambers, sat her down in the leather chair across from his desk, looked at her with those cold gray eyes, and explained, very calmly, how things were going to proceed. "You have 2 choices," he had said. "Withdraw your complaint and finish your degree, or pursue this further and watch everything you've built disappear. Your scholarship, your career, your reputation." He'd leaned forward, his voice dropping to something almost intimate. "I've been doing this for 30 years. You're not the first ambitious young woman who thought she could take me down. You won't be the last." Aurora had made her choice. She'd refused to withdraw. Within a month, she was expelled from law school, blacklisted from every firm in the state. Her friends stopped returning calls. Her family received anonymous threats. The screenshots she'd taken vanished from every device she owned, along with the backup copies she'd made. Vale's case against Helion settled quietly for pennies on the dollar. The pension holders got nothing. Helion executives got bonuses, and Aurora Mason ceased to exist. The Federal Witness Protection Program had given her a new name, a new history, a new life. They'd hidden her not because she'd witnessed a crime, but because she'd witnessed the wrong people committing it. People with enough power to reach her anywhere, unless she vanished completely. For 8 years, she'd been Aurora Wilson, living in a different city, building different skills, waiting for the moment when she'd have enough evidence, enough resources, enough protection to come back and finish what she'd started. That moment was now. Vale thought he was in control. He thought this courthouse, this courtroom, this case were all running according to his script. He didn't know that Aurora had spent those 8 years preparing, learning, climbing through the ranks of an agency that specialized in exposing exactly the kind of corruption he represented. He didn't know that she wasn't just a victim anymore. But he was about to find out. The courtroom buzzed with renewed energy as Aurora was led back to the defense table. The 30-minute recess had stretched to 45, and speculation had clearly been running wild. More reporters had arrived. More attorneys had found reasons to linger. Even the bailiffs seemed more alert, sensing that something unusual was unfolding. Marcus Webb looked up from his notes as Aurora sat down. His face had changed during the break, the exhaustion replaced by something sharper. Curiosity, maybe, or recognition that his client was not who she appeared to be. "I made some calls during the break," he murmured, low enough that only she could hear. "The fingerprint comparison? You were right. Using hospital records instead of direct samples isn't just irregular. It's potentially grounds for dismissal." "Did you find out who authorized it?" Webb hesitated. "The request came from Judge Vale's chambers, directly." Aurora absorbed this. Vale wasn't even trying to hide his involvement. Either he was supremely confident, or he was panicking. "All rise." The familiar command, the rustle of bodies standing, the heavy footsteps of Harrison Vale returning to his throne. But something was different this time. Vale's movements were stiffer, his expression more controlled. He sat down hard, shuffled papers unnecessarily, took longer than usual to acknowledge the crowd. "This court is back in session." His voice carried its usual authority, but Aurora detected a strain beneath the surface. "The prosecution may continue presenting preliminary evidence." Reynolds stood, adjusting his tie. "Your Honor, in response to the defense's concerns about chain of custody, the state has confirmed that all forensic procedures were followed according to established protocols." "I'd like to hear the recording," Aurora interrupted. Every head in the courtroom turned toward her. Webb made a small noise of protest. Reynolds stopped mid-sentence. "The recording allegedly capturing my voice," Aurora continued. "I have a right to hear evidence presented against me." Vale's eyes narrowed. "The court already established." "With respect, Your Honor, the court established my right to examine fingerprint evidence. The prosecution also mentioned a voice recording. I'd like that examined as well." A long pause. Vale's fingers drummed against the bench. Reynolds looked to the judge for guidance, clearly uncertain how to proceed. "Very well," Vale said finally. "The prosecution will play the recording." Reynolds nodded to a technician near the back of the room. A moment later, speakers crackled to life. A woman's voice, muffled, slightly distorted, filled the courtroom. "I need access to the records room. Case file 2016 CR 2847. The recording ended. Silence stretched through the room. Aurora stood slowly. "That's not my voice." "Of course you'd say that," Reynolds countered. "The state maintains—" "I'm not asking you to take my word for it." Aurora turned to address Vale directly. "I'm requesting formal voice analysis, spectrographic comparison under Daubert standards. If that recording is authentic, scientific analysis will prove it. If it's not—" She let the implication hang. Webb rose beside her. The break had apparently given him courage. "Your Honor, my client raises valid concerns. Voice authentication is a standard forensic procedure. The defense moves for independent analysis before any further proceedings." Vale's composure cracked slightly. His jaw tightened. His hands, resting on the bench, curled into fists, and then slowly relaxed. "Motion for voice analysis is granted." The words seemed to cost him physically. "However, this court sees no reason to delay proceedings pending results. The preliminary hearing will continue." "Your Honor," Aurora said, "I also move for preservation of all surveillance footage from this courthouse for the past 24 hours, specifically footage from the records room showing who actually accessed the evidence box." The courtroom murmured. Reynolds objected loudly about fishing expeditions and procedural overreach. Webb scrambled to cite relevant statutes supporting the request. Through it all, Aurora kept her eyes on Vale. She watched the calculation happening behind his eyes. He couldn't deny the request without appearing compromised. But granting it meant exposing footage that might show the truth, that someone else had entered that records room and handled that evidence box, someone following his orders. Motion for footage preservation is granted, Vale said through gritted teeth. The court directs all relevant recordings be secured and made available to both parties. Aurora nodded. Thank you, Your Honor. But she wasn't finished. One more matter. She straightened her shoulders, feeling the weight of what she was about to say. I believe this court has a conflict of interest that requires disclosure. The murmur became a roar. Reporters leaned forward. Attorneys exchanged shocked glances. Even the bailiffs shifted uneasily. Vale's face went rigid. Choose your next words very carefully, Ms. Wilson. I intend to. Aurora met his gaze without flinching. 8 years ago, before I became Aurora Wilson, I was a law student, interning in these very chambers. I witnessed evidence of judicial misconduct. I filed a complaint, and shortly afterward, my career was destroyed through fabricated accusations. She paused, letting the words settle. The judge I interned for, the judge who destroyed my career, is currently presiding over my case. The courtroom exploded. Vale slammed his gavel, shouting for order. Reynolds demanded that the defendant be held in contempt. Webb looked like he might faint. Reporters were already typing furiously, phones appearing from pockets despite courthouse rules. Through it all, Aurora remained standing. Calm, unshakable. Under 28 U.S.C. Section 455, she continued, her voice cutting through the chaos, a judge must disqualify himself in any proceeding in which his impartiality might reasonably be questioned. Your Honor has personal knowledge of facts in dispute. Your Honor has a personal interest in the outcome. Your Honor's continued presence on this case is a violation of federal law. Vale's gavel came down again and again. This is outrageous. These accusations are true. Aurora's voice was quiet now, but somehow it carried further than his shouting. And I can prove it. Every word. Silence fell like a hammer. Vale stared at her. She stared back. 8 years of rage and pain and preparation crystallized into this single moment. Your Honor, Aurora said softly, just for him, you should know something before you make your next decision. She leaned forward slightly. You're under investigation, and not just by me. This story is far from over. Subscribe now, because the truth is about to come out, and you won't want to miss a single moment. The chaos that followed would be discussed in courthouse corridors for months. Vale called for an immediate recess. 90 minutes, he declared, as if extra time could somehow undo what had just happened. Bailiffs swarmed the courtroom, ushering spectators toward the exits. Reynolds huddled with assistants, their whispered conversation sharp with panic. Webb stood frozen at the defense table, staring at his client as if seeing her for the first time. Aurora was led out through the side door, past the holding room, down a corridor she didn't recognize. They were taking her somewhere new, somewhere away from witnesses. The door at the end of the corridor opened into a conference room. Gray walls, fluorescent lights, a metal table bolted to the floor. Standard interrogation setup. But the man waiting inside wasn't standard at all. He stood by the window, silhouetted against the harsh daylight. Dark suit, no tie, posture that suggested military training. When he turned, Aurora recognized him immediately, even after 8 years. Ethan Cross. He'd aged, lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. Gray threaded through his dark hair. But the intensity was the same. Those searching eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. He'd been a law student when she knew him. Idealistic, determined, one of the few people who'd believed her when she'd made accusations against Vale. He'd tried to help, had been trying to gather evidence to support her claims when she'd vanished into witness protection. Now, apparently, he was something else entirely. Ms. Wilson. His voice was professional, carefully neutral. I'm Special Agent Ethan Cross, FBI. I need to ask you some questions. Aurora sat down across from him, conscious of the cuffs still binding her wrists. About what? About your interest in Case 2016-CR2847. About your accusations against Judge Vale. He paused. About why you've been investigating Helion Financial Corporation for the past 3 years. She went very still. How do you know about that? Because I've been investigating them, too. He sat down, placing a folder on the table between them. Your name, your real name, Aurora Mason, appeared in documents we recovered from a Helion subsidiary 6 months ago. Internal communications discussing a problem witness from 8 years ago. Instructions to monitor your movements if you ever resurfaced. Aurora processed this. They knew I was coming back. They suspected. When you submitted that records request this morning, it triggered an alert. Someone at Helion has contacts inside this courthouse. Ethan's jaw tightened. By the time we realized what was happening, you were already in custody. And you came here to, what, warn me? Help me.
Arrest me yourself? I came here because the FBI has been building a case against Helion and their network for 3 years. And somehow, a woman I knew in law school, a woman I thought disappeared forever, has managed to assemble evidence that overlaps with our investigation. He studied her face. Who are you, really, Aurora? What have you become? She held his gaze for a long moment, calculating, weighing risks and possibilities. Then she reached into her shirt and pulled out a thin chain. Hanging from it was a small metal disc, a pendant to casual observation. But when she pressed her thumb to its surface, the disc split apart, revealing a concealed compartment. Inside was a credential card. She slid it across the table. Ethan picked it up, read it. His face went through several expressions in quick succession: confusion, disbelief, recognition, and finally, something that might have been admiration. Internal Affairs Special Inspector, he read aloud. Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. I spent 8 years preparing to come back here, Aurora said quietly. The witness protection program gave me a new identity. I used it to build a new career, one that would give me the authority and resources to finish what I started. You're not a victim anymore? No, I'm an investigator, and Harrison Vale is my target. Ethan set down the credential card. His expression had shifted again, no longer the careful neutrality of a federal agent, but something more personal, more conflicted. 8 years, he said. Anito, I looked for you. After you disappeared, I tried to find out what happened, where they took you. Nobody would tell me anything. They weren't supposed to. That was the point of witness protection. I thought you were dead. His voice was rough. I thought Vale had found some way to make you disappear permanently. I spent 2 years trying to prove it, before I gave up and joined the Bureau. Aurora felt something shift in her chest, an old ache, barely acknowledged, stirring to life. She pushed it down. There would be time for personal histories later. Or there wouldn't. I'm not dead, she said.
And I'm not running anymore. I came back to expose Vale and everyone connected to him. The question is, are you going to help me or get in my way? Ethan stood, walked to the window, stood there for a long moment, his back to her, watching the parking lot below. The Bureau has been building a case against Helion for 3 years, he said finally. Wire fraud, securities violations, pension fund manipulation. Vale is connected. We know he is, but we haven't been able to prove the link directly. He turned to face her. You have evidence? 8 years' worth. Documentation of every case Vale has influenced. Financial records showing payments through shell corporations. Witness statements from people he's threatened or silenced. Aurora paused. And the original screenshots I took in his chambers. The ones everyone thought were deleted. How? I made copies. Physical copies. Hidden in a place nobody thought to look. She almost smiled. I was a law student, not a fool. I knew digital files could be erased. Paper is harder to destroy. Ethan absorbed this, the implications, the possibilities. Vale will fight back, he said. Whatever you have, he'll claim it's fabricated. He'll use every tool at his disposal to discredit you. Let him try. Aurora rose from her chair, the handcuffs clinking. I've spent 8 years preparing for this moment. I know his playbook. I know his allies. And I know things about his operation that even your investigation hasn't uncovered yet. Like what? Aurora met his eyes. Like the fact that he's not working alone. Like the fact that there are other judges, other officials embedded in this network. Like the fact that Helion Financial is just the beginning. The door opened. A bailiff appeared, expression impatient. Agent Cross, the hearing is resuming. Ethan held up a hand. One moment. He crossed to Aurora, standing close enough that their conversation wouldn't carry. I can't stop what's happening in that courtroom, he said quietly. Vale still has jurisdiction, but I can make sure you're not alone in this. Whatever evidence you have, whatever testimony you can provide, the Bureau will support your investigation. And if Vale tries to bury me before I can present it? Something hardened in Ethan's expression. Then I'll personally ensure that everything you've gathered reaches the right hands, no matter what. Aurora studied him. The boy she'd known had become a man with power and resources and, apparently, the same stubborn commitment to justice that had drawn her to him years ago. Partners, then, she said. Partners! The bailiff cleared his throat impatiently. Ethan stepped back, his professional mask sliding back into place. I'll be in the gallery, he said. Whatever happens next, you won't be alone. Aurora nodded. Then she let the bailiff lead her back toward the courtroom, where Harrison Vale waited, where the battle she'd prepared for 8 years was about to enter its final phase. She walked with her head high and her shoulders straight. The cuffs were still on her wrists. The wound on her temple still throbbed. But for the first time since she'd entered this courthouse, she felt something other than rage. She felt hope. The courtroom had transformed during the recess. More reporters, more cameras, more tension crackling in the air like static before a storm. Vale sat rigid behind the bench, his face a mask of judicial composure that couldn't quite hide the fury underneath. Beside him, a woman Aurora didn't recognize whispered urgently, counsel probably, advising him on how to handle the situation without making it worse. Too late for that. Reynolds stood at the prosecution table, papers spread before him in disarray. He looked like a man who'd realized he was standing on quicksand and couldn't figure out which direction led to solid ground. Webb waited at the defense table, his expression a mixture of anxiety and barely contained excitement. Whatever Aurora had become in the past 8 years, he clearly sensed that it was something far beyond a simple defendant. The gallery hummed with whispered speculation. In the back row, Ethan Cross sat with 2 other agents, federal presence now visible, now impossible to ignore. All rise. The ritual words, the rustle of bodies, the weight of what was about to happen pressing down on everyone in the room. Vale remained seated for a long moment before standing. A breach of protocol so small that only court veterans would notice. A tell. This hearing will now resume. His voice was steady, but his eyes kept darting to the federal agents in the gallery. Before we proceed, the court wishes to address certain accusations made by the defendant. Aurora rose before he could continue. Your Honor, I renew my motion for recusal. Your personal connection to me and to the matters at issue in this case creates an insurmountable conflict of interest. Denied. The word came out too fast, too sharp. Vale visibly forced himself to slow down. This court has reviewed the defendant's claims and finds them without merit. There is no documented connection between this court and the defendant prior to today's proceedings. The documentation exists, Your Honor. Whether you've chosen to acknowledge it is another matter. Vale's face darkened. You are dangerously close to contempt, Ms. Wilson. My name, Aurora said clearly, is Aurora Mason. I was a law student at this institution's affiliated college 8 years ago. I interned in your chambers during my final semester. I witnessed evidence of corruption, specifically payments from Helion Financial Corporation in exchange for favorable rulings, and I reported it to the Judicial Ethics Board. The courtroom erupted. Vale's gavel crashed down again and again. Reynolds shouted objections. Cameras flashed despite the prohibition. But Aurora kept talking, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. The evidence I gathered was subsequently destroyed through illegal means. My academic career was sabotaged through fabricated plagiarism charges. I was forced into federal witness protection because credible threats were made against my life. She pointed at Vale. Threats that originated from your chambers. Enough! Vale was on his feet now, all pretense of judicial calm abandoned. Bailiffs, remove this woman from my courtroom. She is hereby held in contempt. Your Honor! A new voice. Ethan Cross, rising from his seat in the gallery, federal badge visible in his hand. Before you take that action, you should know that the FBI is prepared to execute federal warrants related to the matters Ms. Mason has described. The room went absolutely silent. Vale stood frozen, gavel raised, face cycling through emotions too fast to track. Fear, rage, calculation, more fear. This is highly irregular, Reynolds managed. The federal government cannot simply, we can and we are. Ethan moved down the aisle, his credentials still visible. Judge Harrison Vale, you are hereby notified that you are a subject of ongoing federal investigation into wire fraud, obstruction of justice, and civil rights violations under color of law. Any attempt to interfere with potential witnesses, including the defendant in this case, will be considered additional grounds for prosecution. The words landed like bombs. Vale's face went ashen. His hand, still holding the gavel, began to tremble. This is outrageous, he stammered. You have no authority to— I have every authority. Ethan stopped at the bar, positioning himself between Vale and Aurora. And I have evidence. Documentation of payments from Helion Financial to accounts you control, records of communications with co-conspirators, testimony from witnesses you thought you'd silenced. He turned to Aurora. His expression softened slightly, just for a moment. Including testimony from Internal Affairs Special Inspector Aurora Mason, who, as it turns out, has been building a parallel case against you for the past several years. Aurora stepped forward, standing beside Ethan at the bar. She looked up at Vale, the man who had destroyed her once, who had tried to destroy her again, who even now stood behind the bench with diminishing authority. "You made a mistake," she said quietly. "You thought I would stay buried. You thought your power would protect you forever. But power like yours only works as long as people are afraid." She let the moment stretch. "I'm not afraid anymore." Vale's mouth opened and closed. His eyes darted around the room, to Reynolds, who was backing away from the prosecution table, to the bailiffs, who stood uncertain at their posts, to the federal agents in the gallery, who watched with predatory stillness. No allies, no escape, no more masks to hide behind. "This hearing is concluded." The words came out strangled, barely recognizable as Vale's voice. "All charges against the defendant are dismissed pending further review." He practically ran from the bench, his robes billowing behind him. The door to his chambers slammed shut, with a sound that echoed through the silent courtroom like a gunshot. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Aurora let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her hands, still cuffed, began to tremble. 8 years. 8 years of waiting, preparing, hiding, rebuilding. 8 years leading to this moment. Webb appeared at her elbow, fumbling with keys. "Let me get those off you." The cuffs clicked open, and Aurora rubbed her wrists where angry red marks stood out against her skin. "What happens now?" Webb asked, his voice hushed. What was all that?" Aurora watched the door through which Vale had fled. Beyond it, she knew, federal agents were already taking positions. Warrants were being prepared. The net she'd helped build was finally closing. "Now," she said softly, "we finish what we started." Ethan appeared beside her. His professional mask had slipped entirely now, revealing the man beneath. The law student who'd believed her when no one else would, who'd tried to help her before she vanished, who'd spent years searching for justice in a system designed to deny it. "You okay?" he asked. Aurora considered the question. Her head still ached. Her wrists still burned. Her heart still raced with adrenaline and old fear, and something new. Something that felt like victory. Or at least, its beginning. "I will be," she said. "Soon." The courtroom was emptying around them, reporters rushing to file stories, attorneys murmuring in shocked clusters, spectators lingering to absorb the drama they'd witnessed. But Aurora barely noticed. She was looking at the empty bench where Harrison Vale had sat, the place where he'd pronounced sentence on countless others. The throne from which he'd wielded power like a weapon. Empty now, as it should have been 8 years ago. The battle wasn't over. Vale still had resources, allies, decades of accumulated leverage. The investigation would take months, maybe years. There would be legal maneuvers and political pressure and attempts to discredit everything she'd built. But the tide had turned. The truth was out. And Aurora Mason, not Wilson, never really Wilson, was finally fighting in the open. She turned to Ethan, her eyes bright with something between tears and triumph. "Let's finish this," she said. Together, they walked out of the courtroom and into whatever came next. The conference room door closed with a soft click. Aurora stood facing Ethan Cross across a metal table bolted to the floor, fluorescent lights humming overhead. the distant sounds of the Federal Command Center filtering through thin walls. 8 years since she had seen him. 8 years since he was a law student trying to help her. And she was a frightened witness, disappearing into a new identity. Now he wore a federal badge, and she wore handcuff marks on her wrists, and everything between them had changed, except the way he looked at her, searching, intense, trying to understand. "Ms. Wilson," his voice was carefully professional. "I'm Special Agent Ethan Cross, FBI. I need to ask you some questions about your interest in Case 2016 CR 2847. Aurora remained standing. The adhesive bandage on her temple had begun peeling at the edges again. Her wrists still bore angry red marks where Mercer's cuffs had dug into skin. "You already know why I'm interested in that case." Ethan's expression flickered. "I know your name appeared in documents we recovered from a Helion financial subsidiary 6 months ago. Internal communications discussing a problem witness from 8 years ago. Instructions to monitor your movements if you ever resurfaced. They knew I was coming back. They suspected. When you submitted that records request this morning, it triggered an alert. Someone at Helion has contacts inside this courthouse." His jaw tightened. "By the time we realized what was happening, you were already in custody." Aurora studied his face. The boy she remembered had become a man. Harder edges, deeper lines around his eyes, the weight of years spent fighting battles she could only imagine. But something familiar remained beneath the professional mask. Something that made her next decision easier. "You don't recognize me," she said quietly. "Should I?" She reached into her shirt and pulled out a thin chain. Hanging from it was a small metal disc, unremarkable to casual observation, but when she pressed her thumb against its surface, the disc split apart, revealing a concealed compartment. Inside was a credential card. She slid it across the table. Ethan picked it up, read it. His face cycled through confusion, disbelief, recognition, and finally something that looked almost like wonder. "Internal Affairs Special Inspector." He read the words aloud, as if saying them might make them more real. "Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division." His eyes lifted to meet hers. "Aurora Mason." "Hello, Ethan." He stood so abruptly, his chair scraped against the floor. "You're alive. You're actually—" 8 years, Aurora. 8 years I thought you were dead. I searched everywhere. I filed complaints. I made myself a target trying to prove what Vale did to you. I know. I read the reports. You read the— He stopped, processing. You've been watching. This whole time. You've been somewhere, watching everything. Not watching, working. Aurora finally sat down, the exhaustion of the day settling into her bones. The Witness Protection Program gave me a new identity. I used it to build a new career, one that would give me the authority and resources to come back here and finish what I started. Ethan sank back into his chair. The professional mask had cracked completely now, revealing the man beneath, the law student who had believed her when no one else would, who had tried to help her before she vanished. Why didn't you contact me? Let me know you were alive? Because contacting anyone from my old life would have compromised the protection. And because I needed to become someone Vale couldn't destroy again. She paused. I needed to become someone who could destroy him instead. The words hung between them. 8 years of separation. 8 years of parallel paths. His leading into the FBI, hers into internal affairs, both converging on the same target through different routes. The investigation, Ethan said slowly. The one we've been building against Helion for 3 years. You're connected to it. I've been building a parallel case. Documentation of every ruling Vale has influenced. Financial records showing payments through shell corporations. Witness statements from people he's threatened or silenced. Aurora leaned forward. And the original screenshots I took in his chambers. The ones everyone thought were deleted. Those files were destroyed. Our forensics team confirmed. Digital files were destroyed. I made physical copies. Photographs of photographs. Hidden in a place no one thought to look. Almost a smile crossed her face. I was a law student, not a fool. I knew digital evidence could be erased. Paper is harder to destroy. Ethan absorbed this. The implications. The possibilities. Vale will fight back. Whatever you have, he'll claim it's fabricated. He'll use every tool at his disposal to discredit you. Let him try. I've spent 8 years preparing for this moment. Aurora stood, moving toward the door. The hearing resumes in 15 minutes. I have evidence to present. Aurora. His voice stopped her. Whatever happens next, you're not alone anymore. The Bureau will support this investigation. Whatever resources you need. She looked back at him. The boy she had known was gone, replaced by someone stronger. Someone forged by the same fires that had transformed her. Partners, then. Partners! The courtroom crackled with tension when Aurora returned. More reporters had crowded into the gallery. More attorneys had found reasons to observe. Even the bailiffs seemed sharper, sensing that something unprecedented was unfolding. Vale sat rigid behind the bench, conferring in urgent whispers with a woman Aurora didn't recognize. Counsel, probably, advising damage control strategies that were already failing. Marcus Webb rose as Aurora approached the defense table. His expression had shifted during the recess, the exhausted resignation replaced by something sharper. Curiosity. Recognition that his client was not who she appeared to be. I made some calls, he murmured. The fingerprint analysis? You were right. Using hospital records instead of direct samples isn't just irregular. It's potentially grounds for dismissal. Who authorized it? Webb hesitated. The request came from Judge Vale's chambers, directly. Before Aurora could respond, the bailiff's voice cut through the murmur. All rise. Vale emerged from his whispered conference, ascending to the bench with movements that seemed stiffer than before. His face was composed, but something had changed behind his eyes. The confidence had curdled into calculation. This court is back in session. His voice carried its usual authority, but Aurora detected strain beneath the surface. Before we proceed, the defense may present any additional motions. Aurora rose from her seat. Webb reached for her arm, too late. Your Honor, I move to represent myself for the remainder of these proceedings. The courtroom stirred. Vale's eyes narrowed. You're waiving your right to counsel? Under Ferretta v. California, I have the constitutional right to self-representation. I make this choice knowingly and voluntarily. Aurora's voice carried clearly across the room. I understand the risks. I accept them. Webb leaned close, whispering urgently. This is a mistake. Let me... Thank you for your service, Mr. Webb. I'll take it from here. Vale studied her for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite fear, but its close cousin. Recognition that the dynamics had changed in ways he hadn't anticipated. Motion granted. The defendant will represent herself. He settled back in his chair. Proceed. Aurora moved to the center of the courtroom, positioning herself to address both the bench and the gallery. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across her face, highlighting the bandage on her temple, the composed determination in her eyes. Your Honor, I intend to demonstrate that every charge against me was manufactured, that the evidence presented by the prosecution was fabricated, and that the person responsible for this fabrication, she paused, letting the moment stretch, is currently presiding over this hearing. The courtroom erupted. Vale's gavel crashed down once, twice, 3 times. Order! The defendant will refrain from making unfounded accusations. They're not unfounded. Aurora's voice cut through the chaos with surgical precision. Under 28 U.S.C. Section 455, a judge must disqualify himself in any proceeding where his impartiality might reasonably be questioned. Your Honor has personal knowledge of disputed facts. Your Honor has a direct personal interest in the outcome. She stepped closer to the bench. Your Honor knows exactly who I am, and you know exactly why I'm here. Vale's face had gone pale. His knuckles whitened around the gavel. These accusations are grounds for contempt. Then hold me in contempt. Add it to the fabricated charges. Aurora turned to address the gallery, the reporters with their notebooks poised, the attorneys watching with predatory interest. 8 years ago, my name was Aurora Mason. I was a law student interning in Judge Vale's chambers. I discovered evidence of corruption, payments from Helion Financial Corporation in exchange for favorable rulings, and I reported it through proper channels. She pulled documents from the folder Webb had prepared, holding them up for the room to see. In response, Judge Vale orchestrated a campaign to destroy me, manufactured plagiarism charges, threats against my family, ultimately, conspiracy to cause me physical harm. She set the documents on the prosecution's table with deliberate care. I have proof, documentation spanning 8 years of investigation, financial records, witness statements, recordings. Enough! Vale was on his feet, all pretense of judicial composure abandoned. Bailiffs, remove this woman from my courtroom immediately. Your Honor! A new voice. Ethan Cross, rising from his seat in the gallery, federal badge visible in his hand. Before you take that action, you should be aware that the FBI is prepared to execute federal warrants related to the matters Ms. Mason has described. The room went absolutely silent. Vale stood frozen, gavel raised, face cycling through emotions too rapidly to track. Fear, rage, calculation, more fear. This is highly irregular, the prosecutor managed. Federal intervention in state proceedings requires... We have jurisdiction! Ethan moved down the aisle, positioning himself between Vale and Aurora. Judge Harrison Vale, you are hereby notified that you are a subject of ongoing federal investigation into wire fraud, obstruction of justice, and civil rights violations under color of law. Any attempt to interfere with potential witnesses will be considered additional grounds for prosecution. Aurora watched Vale's face as the words landed. 8 years of waiting for this moment. 8 years of preparation. And now, finally, she was watching his empire begin to crumble. I have evidence to present, she said calmly. Documentation that will prove everything I've alleged. Vale's mouth opened and closed. His eyes darted around the room, to the federal agents now visible in the gallery, to the reporters capturing every moment, to the attorneys who had once sought his favor, now watching his destruction. This court, his voice cracked. He cleared his throat, tried again. This court will take a brief recess to consider. No recess. Aurora stepped forward. I have the right to present my defense. I'm exercising that right now. She turned to the display screen that had been used earlier for prosecution exhibits. Ethan nodded to a technician who began loading new files. Exhibit A, email correspondence recovered from Helion financial servers, obtained through federal subpoena. The screen filled with text, dates, amounts, account numbers. This email, dated March 15, 2016, confirms transfer of $200,000 to an offshore account registered to Vail Family Trust, Grand Cayman Branch. Aurora read aloud, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. Package received. Case will be handled per agreement. Helion thanks you for your cooperation. She let the words settle before continuing. The case referenced was Helion Financial versus Meridian Pension Fund, a civil action involving fraud allegations against Helion. Judge Vail presided. She pulled up court records. The case was dismissed 3 weeks after this payment. Insufficient evidence, according to the ruling, despite documentary proof that Helion executives had deliberately misrepresented fund performance to investors. Vail had sunk back into his chair. His face had gone gray. Exhibit B. New documents appeared on screen. Email from Judge Vail's personal account to Sergeant Cole Mercer, sent yesterday at 9:47 p.m. Aurora read, Aurora Wilson is Aurora Mason. Detain her before she reaches the records room. Make it look legitimate. The gallery erupted again. Reporters were typing furiously. Attorneys whispered urgently to each other. This email proves that my arrest this morning was not a response to any crime. It was a preemptive strike designed to prevent me from accessing evidence that would expose Judge Vail's corruption. Exhibit C. The screen displayed a technical report. Voice spectrographic analysis conducted by FBI Forensics Laboratory, case number 2024 FBI MIA 0472. Aurora's voice hardened. The audio recording used to accuse me of requesting access to the records room? Artificially generated. Created using AI voice synthesis technology. Confidence level, 97.3%. She turned to face Vail directly. You manufactured that recording. You planted fingerprint evidence using samples stolen from my hospital records. You coordinated with courthouse staff to create a paper trail that would justify my arrest. Her voice dropped lower, but somehow carried further. You tried to destroy me once. It didn't work, and now everyone in this room knows exactly what you are. Vail's hands trembled on the bench. His mouth worked silently, searching for words that wouldn't come. Exhibit D. Aurora nodded to the technician. Security footage from the courthouse records room, timestamp 6:14 a.m. this morning. The screen showed grainy but clear footage. A figure entering the records room, moving to a specific shelf, handling an evidence box. The figure turned slightly toward the camera. Troy Sutter, the bailiff who had threatened her in the holding room. This footage proves that I never entered the records room, that my fingerprints were planted by someone else, that every piece of evidence against me was manufactured as part of a coordinated effort to silence me before I could expose the truth. Aurora gathered her documents, straightening them with deliberate care. But I'm not finished, because Judge Vail's corruption extends far beyond one false arrest. She looked toward the gallery, where a young man had risen from his seat. Slight build, nervous energy, eyes that held a weight far beyond his 22 years. I call Liam Vail as a witness. If you're watching this unfold, you know this is the moment everything changes. Subscribe now, because you won't want to miss what happens next. The courtroom held its breath as Liam Vail walked toward the witness stand. His father's face had gone from gray to white, eyes tracking his son's movement with something that looked almost like terror. Liam. Vail's voice was barely a whisper. Don't do this. Liam didn't look at his father. He kept his eyes fixed on the witness stand, on Aurora, on anything except the man who had raised him. The clerk administered the oath. Liam's voice was steady as he swore to tell the truth, but his hands gripped the armrests of the witness chair like lifelines. Aurora approached slowly, giving him time to settle. She understood what this moment cost him: the betrayal of blood, the destruction of family, the weight of choosing truth over loyalty. Mr. Vale, please state your relationship to the defendant and to the presiding judge. I have no prior relationship with the defendant. Liam's voice was quiet but clear. Judge Harrison Vale is my father. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Vale had gone completely still behind the bench, a statue carved from ice and fear. Mr. Vale, approximately 3 years ago, did you discover certain documents in your father's home? Yes. Can you describe what you found? Liam took a breath. His eyes finally lifted to meet his father's, just for a moment, just long enough for something painful to pass between them. I found financial records in his home safe. Bank statements showing large deposits from accounts I didn't recognize. Correspondence with attorneys I'd never heard of. Case files that shouldn't have existed outside official court records. What did these documents suggest to you? That my father was receiving payments in exchange for favorable rulings. Liam's voice hardened slightly. That he was corrupt. Vale's hands slammed against the bench. This is outrageous. My own son coerced into— Your Honor. Ethan Cross stepped forward. Any further interruption of witness testimony will be grounds for immediate arrest. Vale's mouth snapped shut. His eyes burned with fury, but he said nothing more. Aurora continued. Mr. Vale, what did you do after discovering these documents? I confronted my father, asked him to explain. Liam's jaw tightened. He told me I was misunderstanding, that things weren't as they appeared, that I should trust him and forget what I'd seen. Did you forget? No. The word came out sharp, definitive. I started documenting, keeping my own records, taking photographs of documents when he wasn't home, recording conversations when I could. He paused. I knew that someday someone would need proof of what he'd done. Aurora pulled another document from her folder. I'm entering into evidence a recording provided by the witness, audio captured 3 years ago in Judge Vale's home study. The courtroom speakers crackled to life. 2 voices, one unmistakably Vale's, the other male and unfamiliar. The situation requires permanent resolution. Vale's recorded voice was calm, businesslike. She's already contacted the ethics board. If she's allowed to testify, the documentation she possesses could expose the entire network. What level of resolution are we discussing? Whatever's necessary. I don't want details. I want results. That can be arranged. The usual fee structure? Double it. This needs to happen quickly and cleanly. No traces, no connections back to me. The recording continued for another minute. Logistics, payment methods, timelines. 2 men discussing murder with the casual efficiency of a business transaction. When it ended, the silence was absolute. Aurora let the moment breathe before speaking. Mr. Vale, do you know who your father was speaking with in this recording? No, I never identified the other voice. Do you know who they were discussing? Liam's eyes moved to Aurora. Something flickered in his expression. Recognition, perhaps, or sorrow. A woman who had accused my father of corruption, someone he needed to eliminate. Aurora nodded slowly. That woman was Mai. The gallery erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Attorneys scrambled for their phones. Even the bailiffs seemed uncertain, looking to each other for guidance that no one could provide. Through it all, Aurora kept her eyes on Vale. The man who had destroyed her career, forced her into hiding, conspired to end her life, now watching his empire collapse in real time. "Mr. Vale," she continued, raising her voice above the chaos, "did your father ever discuss other witnesses he had handled?" Objection. The prosecutor's voice was weak, uncertain. "Hearsay? Overruled." The word came from an unexpected source. Everyone turned to the bench, where Vale sat with his head in his hands. "Just overruled," Liam answered. He mentioned others, names I didn't recognize, people who had discovered things they shouldn't have discovered. He talked about them like problems that had been solved. How many? At least 3 that I know of, maybe more. Aurora turned to face the gallery, addressing not just the court, but the cameras, the reporters, the public that would soon learn the truth. Judge Harrison Vale has spent 12 years corrupting the justice system he swore to uphold. He has accepted bribes. He has manufactured evidence. He has destroyed careers and threatened lives. Her voice rose. And he has done all of this while wearing robes that are supposed to represent fairness, integrity, and the rule of law. She turned back to the bench, where Vale sat motionless, defeated. "Liam, one more question. Why did you agree to testify today? You could have remained silent, protected your father, preserved your family name." Liam was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice cracked with emotion he'd been suppressing. "My mother died 2 years ago. Stress-related illness, the doctors said. But I know the truth." He looked at his father for the first time since taking the stand. "She knew what you were doing. She was afraid of you. Afraid of what you'd become. And that fear," his voice broke, "that fear killed her." "Liam," Vale started. "No," Liam cut him off, standing from the witness chair. "You don't get to say my name. Not anymore." Tears streamed down his face, but his voice grew stronger. "Mom wanted to leave you, wanted to tell the truth. But she was afraid of what you'd do to me if she tried. So she stayed, and she died. And I promised myself—" He was shouting now, years of suppressed rage pouring out. "I promised her that someone would know, that the truth would come out, that you would pay for what you've done." Vale rose from the bench, his face contorted with fury and despair. "You're my son, my blood. How could you?" "How could I?" Liam's laugh was bitter, broken. "How could you? You destroyed people, Dad. Innocent people. You took money to ruin lives. And when anyone got close to the truth, you made them disappear." He pointed at Aurora. "She was 25 years old, a law student, and you tried to have her killed. That's not— I never meant— You ordered it!" Liam's voice echoed off the marble walls. "I have the recording. Everyone in this room heard it. You ordered someone to kill her, and the only reason she's standing here today is because she was smarter than you, stronger than you." Vale stumbled backward, knocking his chair over. His robes caught on the edge of the bench, pulling askew. The man who had ruled this courtroom for decades now looked small, diminished, stripped of every illusion of power. "Mom wanted you to stop." Liam's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but it carried through the silent room. "That's all she wanted. For you to stop. To be the man she thought she married." He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "She died, waiting for you to change. And I'm done waiting." He stepped down from the witness stand and walked toward the exit. At the door, he paused, looking back at his father one final time. "I hope they give you the maximum sentence. I hope you spend the rest of your life in a cell, thinking about what you've done." His voice was steady now, cold. "And I hope Mom is finally at peace, knowing the truth came out." The door closed behind him with a sound of finality. Aurora stood in the center of the courtroom, surrounded by chaos. Reporters shouting questions, attorneys arguing with each other, federal agents moving into position around the perimeter. And at the bench, Harrison Vale, former judge, former power broker, former untouchable figure, sat with his head bowed, shoulders shaking. Ethan Cross approached the bench, two agents flanking him. "Harrison Vale, you are under arrest. The charges include wire fraud under 18 U.S.C. Section 1343, obstruction of justice under 18 U.S.C. Section 1512, conspiracy to deprive civil rights under color of law, 18 U.S.C. Section 242. He paused. "Additional charges are pending based on evidence presented today." Vale looked up. His face was wet with tears. Whether of remorse or self-pity, Aurora couldn't tell. Perhaps it didn't matter. "You can't do this." His voice was hoarse, barely recognizable. "I'm a judge. You're a defendant now." Ethan nodded to the agents, who moved forward with handcuffs. Vale struggled as they pulled his arms behind his back. "This isn't over. I have connections. I have—" The cuffs clicked shut. "You don't know what you're starting. The people I work with? They won't. They're next." Aurora stepped forward, standing directly in front of him, close enough to see every line on his face, every trace of the arrogance that was crumbling into desperation. "Helion Financial, Vera Langston, every judge, every prosecutor, every official in your network. We're coming for all of them." Vale's eyes met hers. For one moment, the mask fell completely, and beneath it, she saw not a monster, but a man. A man who had made choices, year after year, that had led him to this moment. A man who had convinced himself that power was worth any price. "I should have let you go," he said quietly. 8 years ago, I should have just let you go." "Yes." Aurora's voice held no satisfaction, no triumph, only the cold clarity of truth. "You should have." The agents led him away, his robes dragged on the floor behind him, black fabric trailing through decades of dust and accumulated precedent. The man who had ruled this courtroom was now being marched through it in chains. Aurora watched until he disappeared through the side door. Then she turned to face the gallery, the cameras, the witnesses to history. "This court is adjourned," she said quietly. No one contradicted her. "The truth is finally out. But the story isn't over. Drop a like and stay with me for what comes next." The Federal Command Center hummed with controlled chaos. Agents moved between workstations, phones rang constantly, screens displayed evidence and arrest records in cascading windows. The aftermath of Vale's arrest had triggered an avalanche of activity, warrants being drafted, co-conspirators being identified, witnesses being contacted. Aurora sat in a quiet corner, finally alone. Someone had brought her coffee, cold now, untouched. The bandage on her temple had been replaced with proper dressing. Her wrists still ached, but the red marks were fading. Ethan appeared, weaving through the crowded room. He carried a tablet displaying what looked like financial records. "Langston was arrested an hour ago. Manhattan Field Office." He sat down across from her, She's already asking about cooperation agreements. Of course she is. The documents from Vale's safe. They implicate at least 3 other judges, 2 in Florida, 1 in Georgia. We're coordinating with state authorities. Aurora nodded, processing the cascade of developments. The investigation she had spent 8 years preparing was unfolding faster than she had anticipated. Vale's network was collapsing in real time. What about Mercer? Sutter? Both in custody. Mercer's refusing to talk, but Sutter broke within an hour. Gave us everything. The evidence, planting, the coordination with Vale's office, the threats against potential witnesses. Ethan set down the tablet. He's terrified of what Helion might do to him if he doesn't cooperate with us first. Smart fear. Diana Holt resigned, her lawyers negotiating terms. She's claiming she didn't know the full scope, just followed orders about flagging certain records requests. She knew enough. Aurora finally picked up the coffee, sipped it despite the cold. She called someone the moment I submitted my form. She helped set the trap. Which is why she's facing accessory charges regardless of what she cooperates on. Ethan leaned back in his chair. The judge who'll handle Vale's case, Patricia Morrison. No connections to Helion, no overlap with Vale's network. The DOJ vetted her personally. Good. They sat in silence for a moment. The noise of the command center continued around them. Phones, keyboards, urgent voices, but it felt distant, separated by the weight of everything that had happened. You know this is just the beginning, Aurora said finally. Vale was one judge. Helion is one company. The corruption runs deeper. I know. That's why we're treating this as the starting point, not the conclusion. Ethan met her eyes. The investigation will take years, maybe decades, but the foundation is solid now, thanks to you. Aurora set down the coffee cup. Her hands had finally stopped trembling. When had that happened? And her breathing had settled into something approaching normal. I spent 8 years preparing for today, building evidence, learning procedures, becoming someone Vale couldn't destroy. She paused. I never really thought about what comes after. After? After the arrest, after the trial, after all of this. She gestured vaguely at the command center. I defined myself by this fight for so long. I'm not sure who I am without it. Ethan was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than before. You're someone who refused to be broken. Someone who turned destruction into determination. Someone who spent 8 years becoming exactly what you needed to be to take down a corrupt judge and his entire network. He reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of hers. That's not nothing, Aurora. That's everything. She looked at his hand, at the distance he was maintaining, respecting boundaries even now. You searched for me, she said, after I disappeared. You tried to prove what Vale did. For 2 years, made myself extremely unpopular with people who had reasons to keep the truth buried. He almost smiled. That's part of why I joined the Bureau. I thought federal resources would give me better tools to expose people like Vale. I didn't know. The protection program, the isolation, I couldn't see what was happening back here. You weren't supposed to. That was the point. His smile faded. But I wanted you to know you weren't forgotten. Someone was fighting for you, even when I couldn't find you. Aurora felt something shift in her chest. The wall she had built, 8 years of armor, 8 years of careful emotional distance, developed a crack. Thank you, she said quietly, for not giving up. I couldn't have given up even if I'd wanted to. His eyes held hers. Some things stay with you. The moment stretched between them. 8 years of separation. 8 years of parallel paths converging. Then Aurora's phone buzzed, breaking the spell. She glanced at the screen. Unknown number. Text message. The words made her blood run cold. "What is it?" Ethan asked, reading her expression. She turned the phone so he could see. "Impressive performance today, but Vale wasn't the only one watching. We have resources he lacked. This isn't over, Ms. Mason. Check case number 2019-CR1147 when you have time. You might find it educational." No signature, no identifiable source, just a warning from someone who had clearly been monitoring everything. "Trace it," Aurora said. Ethan was already reaching for his own phone. On it. But they both knew what they would find. Whoever had sent this message knew how to stay hidden. They had resources, they had reach, and they were not afraid. Aurora stared at the case number, 2019-CR1147. 3 years ago, recent enough that records should be accessible, old enough that whatever had happened was already concluded. She typed the number into the federal database access on her tablet. The results loaded slowly, each detail adding to the picture. A fraud case dismissed for insufficient evidence. The presiding judge, Harrison Vale. But that wasn't what caught her attention. The defendant's name had been redacted. The witness list was sealed. Half the court documents were marked classified by federal order. Someone had gone to considerable trouble to bury this case, and now someone else was pointing her toward it. "The trace came back empty," Ethan reported, returning from his call. "Routed through 6 different countries. Whoever sent this knows what they're doing. They want me to find something." Aurora showed him the case file. "Look at this. Vale presided over it 3 years ago. Half the records are sealed or redacted. Could be a trap, lead you somewhere they control. Could be, but it could also be exactly what it looks like. Someone inside the network trying to expose it." She closed the tablet. "Either way, I need to know what's in that file. We'll get it unsealed. Federal authority can... That'll take months. Whoever sent this message is moving now." Aurora stood, stretching muscles that had been tense for hours. "I need to work faster than they expect." Ethan stood too. "Not alone. Whatever this is, we handle it together." She studied his face. The determination there, the commitment. "Partners," she said. "Partners." 3 days later, Aurora stood outside the federal detention center where Vale awaited trial. The concrete building loomed against a gray sky, razor wire glinting in the weak sunlight. She had requested this meeting, officially to discuss potential cooperation, unofficially to understand what she was walking into. The visitation room was standard institutional, metal table, plastic chairs, cameras in every corner. Vale sat on the opposite side of the table, dressed in orange jumpsuit, hands cuffed in front of him. He looked smaller without his robes, older, almost ordinary. Almost. "Ms. Mason." His voice was calm, controlled, the same voice that had pronounced sentence on countless defendants. "I wondered if you'd come. I have questions." "I assumed." He leaned back slightly, "though I'm not sure I'm inclined to answer them." Aurora set her tablet on the table, displaying the mysterious case file. Case 2019-CR1147. You presided over it. Half the records are sealed. Someone wants me to look into it. Something flickered in Vale's expression. Recognition, perhaps fear. "Where did you hear about that case?" Anonymous source. The same one who's been watching this investigation from the beginning. She leaned forward. What happened in that case? Why were the records sealed? Vale was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had changed. Lower, more careful. There are people above me, Ms. Mason. People who use men like me as tools and discard us when we're no longer useful. He glanced at the cameras, then back at her. That case is why I'm sitting here. Not because of what I did, because of what I learned. Explain. The defendant in that case had evidence. Real evidence. Documentation of a network that makes Helion look like a lemonade stand. Vale's hands trembled slightly. I was ordered to dismiss it. Make the evidence disappear. I did what I was told. And then I became a liability. A liability to whom? People who don't leave witnesses. His eyes met hers. You think you won today? You think taking me down means anything to them? I'm a loose end being cleaned up. And now you're a target too. Aurora absorbed this. The anonymous message, the sealed case file, the warning that this wasn't over. Give me names. I can't. Can't or won't. Can't. Because I don't know them. Vale's voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. That's how they operate. Layers of separation, cutouts and intermediaries. The only face I ever saw was... He stopped abruptly, glancing at the cameras again. Was who? Someone who's probably already planning how to silence both of us. He leaned forward, speaking quickly. Listen to me. That case, 2019-CR1147, the defendant knew something worth killing to protect. They made her disappear before trial. The official story is witness protection, but... He shook his head. Nobody enters witness protection and stays there without leaving some trace. She vanished completely, like she never existed. Aurora felt cold spreading through her chest. What was her name? I don't know. It was redacted from every document I received. But the witness list... He paused, choosing his words carefully. There was a code name used in internal communications. Project Lighthouse. What does that mean? I don't know. But if you find out, if you trace that thread to its source... Vale's voice dropped to barely audible. You'll find people who make me look like a parking ticket. The guard signaled that time was up. Vale rose from his chair, chains rattling. One more thing. He turned back to face her. The person who sent you that message? They're testing you, seeing if you're useful or dangerous. My advice? His smile was bitter. Try to be both. The guards led him away. Aurora sat alone in the visitation room, processing everything she'd heard. Project Lighthouse. A defendant who disappeared. A network that considered Vale disposable. The investigation she thought was ending had just revealed itself to be a doorway into something much larger. Aurora walked out of the detention center into the late afternoon light. Ethan waited by the car, arms crossed, concern etched on his face. Anything useful? Maybe. She told him about the conversation. Project Lighthouse, the disappeared defendant, Vale's warning about deeper networks. Ethan's expression darkened. If he's telling the truth, this goes way beyond one corrupt judge. He could be lying, trying to create confusion, buy himself leverage. He could be, but the sealed case file is real. Someone went to considerable trouble to bury it. Ethan opened the car door for her. What do you want to do? Aurora looked back at the detention center. Behind those walls, Harrison Vale sat in a cell, waiting for a trial that would determine the rest of his life. The man who had destroyed her career, forced her into hiding, tried to have her killed, and now, apparently, just another pawn in a larger game. "I want to find out what's in that file," she said. "I want to know who sent me that message, and I want to understand what Project Lighthouse means." That could take years. So did the last investigation. She climbed into the car. "I've done it before. I can do it again." Ethan slid into the driver's seat. "You know this might never end. One network leads to another. One conspiracy reveals a larger one. We could spend the rest of our careers chasing shadows." Aurora considered this. The weariness of 8 years of preparation. The relief of Vale's arrest. The new weight of knowing the fight was far from over. "Some things are worth chasing," she said finally, "even if we never catch them completely." They drove away from the detention center into the fading light. Behind them, the building grew smaller in the mirrors, a monument to one victory in a war that would continue long after today. Aurora's phone buzzed, a new message from the unknown number. "Good. You're asking the right questions. More soon." She showed it to Ethan. His jaw tightened. "Whoever this is, they're playing a long game." "Then so are we." Aurora pocketed the phone. "Whatever comes next, whatever this Project Lighthouse turns out to be, we'll handle it. Together, together." The car merged onto the highway, carrying them toward an uncertain future. The investigation into Vale was concluding, but something larger was beginning. Something that would test everything Aurora had learned, everything she had become. She was ready. 6 weeks later, the formal arraignment took place. Vale stood before Judge Patricia Morrison, surrounded by attorneys who knew they were fighting a losing battle. The charges were read: wire fraud, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, a civil rights violations. Bail was denied. Trial was scheduled for the following spring. Aurora attended but did not speak. She sat in the gallery, watching the man who had destroyed her life face the consequences of his choices. There was no satisfaction in it, just a cold recognition that justice, however imperfect, was being served. After the hearing, she walked out into the autumn sunlight. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters, attorneys, spectators who had come to witness history. Ethan fell into step beside her. Morrison set the trial for March. 5 months to prepare. The evidence is solid. The witnesses are ready. Aurora watched a leaf spiral down from a nearby tree. He'll be convicted. And then what? Then we turn our attention to the larger investigation. Project Lighthouse. The sealed case. Whatever network Vale was part of. They walked in silence for a moment. The crowd had begun to thin, people returning to their normal lives after witnessing extraordinary events. "There's something I've been meaning to ask," Ethan said. "When all this is over, the trial, the investigation, everything, what do you want?" Aurora considered the question. For 8 years, she had wanted only one thing: to bring Vale to justice. Now that goal was within reach, and the question of what came next had no easy answer. "I want to build something," she said finally. "Something that outlasts me. Systems that make corruption harder. Structures that protect the people who speak up." She paused. "I don't want anyone else to go through what I went through." "That's a big goal." "I have time. And now I have resources." She looked at him. "And I have people I trust." Ethan nodded slowly. Something passed between them. Understanding, commitment, the promise of partnership that went beyond professional obligation. "The Bureau offered me a permanent position in the Civil Rights Division," he said. "National scope, major cases." That's significant. Congratulations. I haven't accepted yet. He stopped walking, turning to face her. I wanted to see where this investigation leads first. Where we lead. Aurora felt the crack in her armor widen slightly. 8 years of careful distance. 8 years of protecting herself from connection. And now, standing in the autumn sunlight with someone who had never stopped believing in her. I'd like that, she said quietly, seeing where this leads. Ethan's smile was the first genuine one she'd seen from him since the investigation began. Good. They walked together toward the parking lot, toward whatever came next. Behind them, the courthouse stood solid against the sky, a monument to justice served and justice still to come. Aurora's phone buzzed one final time. She glanced at the message. The trial is the end of one story. Project Lighthouse is the beginning of another. See you soon, Inspector Mason. She showed it to Ethan. His expression hardened. They're watching. Let them watch. Aurora pocketed the phone. We're just getting started. The investigation into Harrison Vale was concluding, but for Aurora Mason, survivor, investigator, witness to corruption at every level, the real work was only beginning. She walked into the afternoon light, ready for whatever came next.